There was no planning. Nobody in the management game ever came in with a plan. You never ever met or coordinated anything with a record company or anything like that. You just put in gigs. And bands gigged. They didn't tour. Tours have a beginning and a middle and an end. The bands of that era, even the biggest bands, gigged. And you would try and get them 5, 6 gigs a week. You might get them £125 on a Monday and a Tuesday, and they might get £300 and £350 on a Friday and a Saturday. They all had percentage deals written into the contracts, and nobody ever bothered to ask how many people had come, what the ticket price was. It was totally different to how it is now. Now it's become a science. Nobody had riders. Nobody said we have to have X amount of power, or the clearance of the stage has to be this, or the stage must take this amount of weight. You just turned up with a transit van with 3 amps and a drum kit. You didn't have any lights, probably. You probably used the stage lights that the university had, or maybe the Birmingham Odeon had. I mean, one of the things I always think that has never really been acknowledged or detailed is what an impact the development of technology had on the live side of the business. I'm talking about how sound systems became bigger. Because my memory of that whole period we're talking about was Marshall stacks. I remember when I put The Who on at university, Pete had Marshall stacks which he would crash into and knock over. The speakers had been taken out of them because they weren't going to spend the money on replacing the speakers. So he had empty Marshall cabinets that he would push his guitar straight through. And again, that's the romance of it. I was a huge fan, and still am, of black soul music of a particular period, which is the James Brown, Isaac Hayes, Motown, Eddie Floyd, Sam and Dave period, Wilson Pickett period. But back in the early 70s when I was working with Barry, it was, you know, one day he calls me in and he says, and I'm like 26 years old and I've got hair down to my waist, and he sends me off to France, I think it was, and Belgium, with Ike and Tina Turner. It was the days when everything was paid in cash. He would put it all in this briefcase with certain other paraphernalia that he had, and a gun. This was before we had the security stuff at airports, and I had never seen anybody carry a gun. And Ike Turner had a gun in his briefcase along with his paraphernalia and wads of cash. And I remember we were at Brussels airport, and because the musicians of that period, both black and white, were generally pretty tight, there was no tour manager. Ike would check it. So Ike was checking everybody in at the front of the queue. And there was a scam in those days where people would have briefcases with false bottoms, and they'd place it over the top of a briefcase, operator click, and that's what happened to his briefcase. He had all the tour money in it, and he had a gun, and he had some paraphernalia. And of course we were not about to report this, kind of rock and a hard place. And amazingly, he didn't go nuts. I mean, he was pretty nutty about it, but he didn't actually kind of punch anybody in the face or anything. And we ended up, what I remember was he paid everybody. I loved working with those artists. I also did Bill Haley and the Comets. And what was interesting about Bill was that it was the same deal as it was with the Black Acts. I would go around to the hotel and I would have £1,000 in a freshly sealed plastic bag from the bank. I would give it to Bill. He would then count it, because they didn't even trust the banks, on the bed, go and put it in the safety deposit box in the hotel, then we'd get on the bus and we'd go. And provided you did it their way, you never had a problem with them.